Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Art Stuff Podcast, a weekly conversation about inspiration, creativity, and of course, all things art. I'm your host, Jessica Johannesson, and I am so happy to be here talking with you today. This week, my conversation is with Lauren Sapala. She is the author of the book, The INFJ Writer. Now, INFJ refers to a Myers-Briggs personality type. If you have not taken that test, you totally should. There will be a link in the show notes to take you to one that I took, and there are any number. All you have to do is search Myers-Briggs personality test, and I guarantee you can find some for free. I found Lauren's book earlier this year when I was really struggling during the 5 months I took off from this show, and it helped me feel less crazy because some of what she talks about in the book really has to do with how your personality type affects your creativity. If you have this personality type, INFJ or INFP, there are certain characteristics that you have that might make you feel like you're a little weird or a little strange, or it just makes sometimes creativity a little bit harder for you than other people. It's also a really common personality type for creative people. So chances are there's definitely a bunch of people listening to this show who fit this. First, I think you should go and read her book, honestly. But it is a book aimed at writers, which I will talk about a little bit more in the after show. However, Lauren's conversation has completely shifted how I think about myself, and my week has been absolutely insane, and I would not have been able to get through it with as much grace as I did without this conversation, because I definitely would have beat myself up way more than I should have. Now, the very short version of my week is last week, my family consisted of 3 people: myself, my husband, and my 19-year-old daughter. This week, today, my family consists of myself, my husband, my 19-year-old daughter, and a 5-year-old boy. A thing happened and I'm helping out, and let me tell you what, 5-year-old boys are really, really exhausting. And to shift from having a 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. sleep schedule and a lot more peace and quiet and a lot less fart jokes and trains has been quite an adjustment for me. It has been exhausting physically and mentally, and I definitely would have been far, far meaner to myself in giving myself the space I need to breathe and get back to what's important to me if I hadn't had this conversation with Lauren. I don't want to oversell it, but seriously, this has literally been one of the most important conversations I think I have ever had. Getting permission from her to accept me for who I am and trust my own creative process this way, I don't think I will ever be the same. And that sounds really, really big, but it felt really, really big. I would not have been able to tell you about this conversation if I hadn't recorded it, because I was just completely blown away listening to her and how much the whole thing just felt like she was talking about me. And that's not even why I asked her on. I asked her on because I loved her book and I thought that it would be great for everyone else. I did not expect it to be this life-changing. And so without any further delay, here is my conversation with Lauren Sapala.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Lauren. How are you doing?
I'm good. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this today. I want you to know that I'm a little bit fangirly about this because your book was awesome, but I'm also a little bit nervous because your book was awesome.
Oh, sweet. Well, I'm nervous too because I'm a highly anxious introvert. So we're nervous together. It's cool.
Yeah, no, I have this giant tight knot in my chest and I've been breathing and I've done several of these interviews with people I don't know and I get crazy nervous every time.
Yeah, I do too. I was sitting here with my hand over my heart. I'm center your energy. It's cool. It's all good. So it's
You don't know how comforting that is because I was literally doing the same thing.
Yeah, I have to do it every time. And I've done tons of interviews. I always get nervous.
I hope it goes away at some point. Otherwise, podcasting is going to be a really stressful thing for me.
Well, you might just get used to it. You might just get, desensitized. You're like, yeah, I'm doing that thing where I'm freaking out. It's cool.
So, most of my audience is going to be visual artists. And even though your book was about writing, until I read it, I had no idea that INFJ was a thing, that personality types mattered. I guess, I don't know where I got the idea, but they always kind of felt like I don't know, like astrology, like
Mhm.
how could this stupid quiz actually tell me anything about myself other than what, Star Wars character I am? And
Mhm.
so I would really love if we could start with what the heck is INFJ and how does this impact our creativity? And of course, I want you to introduce yourself and tell my audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. Should I just go into it now?
Yeah, I tend to just kind of go into it and then edit it as we go because I'm nervous and I haven't done enough of these to actually have a process.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, well, I'll just launch in. Well, my name is Lauren Sapala. I'm a writer, writing coach, and I wrote the INFJ Writer. I also blog on creativity, personality type, and writing at laurensapala.com. So I started out as a writing coach, kind of coaching pretty much everyone, like any writer who showed up on my doorstep and they're like, I'm having problems with a manuscript, I have writer's block. Uh, but what I really noticed is the people I attracted seemed to have the same kinds of problems I had always struggled with in writing, which was a really big resistance to planning. Like, I could not outline a novel to save my life. Every time I tried to outline or write plot points or sort of like scene summaries and then do the writing, it just killed my idea. It killed my story, and I couldn't get anywhere. I had problems for years. I took creative writing classes in college. I did horribly. My teachers were like, "You're hopeless." I actually had one professor who told me, "This just isn't for you. I don't think you're going to get any better. You should just find something to do that's not writing." So
I really hate when teachers do that. It bothers me so much. I've had experiences like that, and it's just terrible. It's so hurtful, and I don't even think they realize it.
oh yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I stopped writing for 7 years after that. I was like, well, this woman's an expert. She knows what she's talking about. But then I started a couple writing groups, and then I started the coaching, and I started talking to all these people who had these same problems. They're like, I see the images in my mind. I feel so emotionally attached to my creative work, but I can't seem to actually make it tangible. I can't make it, into a physical form. And when I started getting into personality theory, I started talking to my clients about like, oh, well, I'm really, into this thing. It's Myers-Briggs. And are you intuitive? Are you an introvert? And so many of my clients and so many of the people in my writing groups were coming up as INFJ and INFP personality types. My writing group especially, it was like all INFPs. It was crazy. I had like 15 INFPs at a table.
I've taken the test a couple of times. I'm generally INFJ, but every once in a while it comes up INFP.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the thing is, I mean, there are Myers-Briggs people out there who are very much attached to like, you need to do this exhaustive test, you need to consult an expert, then you are one type. I really think it's helpful. Like, if you're like, I think I'm an INFJ or I think I'm an INFP, cool. You don't have to nail it down. I think the important thing is realizing, number one, that you're an introvert, and number two, that you're intuitive. And then after that, that you're a feeler.
I looked up the difference. First of all, I did research for this podcast. I want you to know you are the only person out there talking to. I feel like I'm quoting you back to yourself. But I did some looking into the difference, and it really seems like they're almost identical. And so can you talk for a second about what that actually means and maybe what some of those characteristics are? Because I can't actually guarantee that anybody who is listening to this has ever taken that test.
So the thing is, when you get into Myers-Briggs stuff, there's a lot of stereotypes online. And I kind of this is a sticking point for me, because if you go online, there's a big bias towards intuitive people. I think it's because intuitive people are the ones very much interested in this. So we're the ones putting the content out on the web. So you'll see a bias against censors and even kind of thinkers. I've heard, before that ISTPs, for example, were these cold, robotic, mechanical people that had no time for emotions. Well, then I got to know a couple ISTPs in real life, and that can be applied, but they're a complex human being. So everybody is complex. Everybody's complicated. But between the INFJ and the INFP, what it really is, the difference between J and P, it's judging versus perceiving. So people who are judgers, INFJs, they make their decisions based on their feeling function. If the person's a thinker, like an INTJ, they make their decisions based on their thinking function. So judgers make decisions based on either thinking or feeling. Perceivers make their decisions based on intuition or sensing, whatever that preference is for them. So with INFPs make their decisions based on intuition. Now, both types, INFJs and INFPs, are highly intuitive. The INFJ's first function is introverted intuition. So obviously our intuition comes into account, but when it comes time to make that decision in the real world, we make it through our feeling function, and we have extroverted feeling, which takes into account how other people feel. INFPs, in contrast, they will make their decisions much more in the moment. So INFJs, you'll see with decision making, they take not that long to make a decision. They'll make the decision very firmly, and they very rarely look back. They're like,
oh yeah, no, that's so not me.
Yeah, the INFPs, actually, they don't know if the decision is right until they've made it. And then they feel it in their body, whether it's right or not. So what this looks like on the outside is INFPs taking a really long time to make a decision, waffling back and forth. Like they can actually look kind of wishy-washy, like they don't know what they want, they can't decide. And then they'll make a decision and a lot of times say, oh, nope, now I know it was wrong, and they'll backpedal. And they'll
Yes.
redo the decision. Yeah. Because
That's a thing.
then they know they made it and they felt it in their body and they're like, oh, no, that was wrong. And a lot of times they don't even know that they're listening to their body to get that feedback, but that's how they know. And if their body's like, no, that was the wrong decision, then they have to go back. And on the outside, people can get frustrated. They see INFPs as like floaty or spacey or flaky. Like, why can't you just firmly make a decision and stick to it? Well,
I say that to myself all the time.
They're not spacey at all. They have extroverted intuition is the INFP's second function. That's how they deal with the outside world. So you'll like if you have an INFJ and an INFP who walk into a restaurant for lunch. First of all, the INFJ has probably already evaluated that they might have come to this restaurant for lunch and looked up the menu online and had a pretty good idea of what's on the menu. If not, they will quickly scan the menu. They will quickly make their decision. They're like, I'm having the chicken sandwich. And they order it and they just have it and they just move on with their life. The INFP is going to stand there and just be overwhelmed by that menu. There's so much information. Do they want hot peppers? Do they want mushrooms? Do they want chicken? Should they be eating less meat? Like all of these decisions. And then finally, like they'll feel like time's running out. They feel pressured. They'll just kind of pick something and they'll put the order in, but then they'll kind of get this remorse. Like, oh, I shouldn't have gotten the chicken sandwich. I should have gotten the falafel. And then the sandwich will come and they'll make do with it, but they're kind of like doubting themselves. It's just because they have all of this extroverted intuition information coming at them every single second.
That's crazy. See, I feel really stupid for connecting this stuff to something as, I don't know, woo-woo as astrology, because you're talking and I can totally see myself. So how do you see these things play out in the creativity that your clients use? And I mean, writing is still creative, but I do the same thing, even though I'm not primarily a writer, when I'm painting. And I can't make a decision and I'm not sure what I want to do. And then I worry that I've made the wrong thing. So what kind of things do you see and how do you get past that?
Well, okay, here's the thing. The way that I know if someone's an INFJ or an INFP, when I do client consultations, INFJs, they are introverts. They are very accommodating. They're people pleasers. But if you really talk to them for a while, they feel kind of like a drill. INFJs feel almost they drill down into things. They're very aggressive once they have centered in on what they want. They want to do this one project. They want to write this one book, and it's going to look this way. And that's the way it's going to be. And they're very perfectionistic. And they can be very single-minded about it to the point where it's like, whoa, dude, you kind of got to lay off. That's where that perfectionism comes in. INFPs, in contrast, they have about a bazillion things they want to do. They are getting ideas every minute. So when I talk to an INFP, they've got like 5 or 6 big projects floating around that they would really love to pursue. The thing that is always the problem with an INFP, they always come to me because they say, I can't focus. I can't pick one thing and stick to it. I need to find a way to just pick one project and work on it until it's finished, go from point A, B, C, D, And that's the way you do things. I've always had problems with this, and I just need to like buckle down and learn how to do this. And time management, priorities, like they've got the jargon down because they're big readers. They usually read a lot of like self-help motivation stuff. That's not the problem. The problem is not that they need to focus. The problem is that INFPs, they don't work in a straight line. They work in circles. They need 5 or 6 things going on at the same time. They need to be in the middle of a huge mess and go to one thing and work on it a little bit, and then flutter over to another thing and work on that, and then find some inspiration there for the third thing, and then circle back around. They need to do this meandering, no deadline, working in circles thing. They need a lot of free time, and they need a lot of free space. They need big blocks of free space to expand in that way. And that's hard for them to wrap their heads around because we live in a culture that is so rational and linear. So
yes,
yeah, our schools, our workplaces, our government, everything is set up in this like to-do list way. You work on one thing, you finish it, you move on to the next task, check that box. That's not how INFPs work. So they're constantly pouring their energy into their weakest areas, and it's like they're swimming upstream. If they just let themselves, if they were like, Monday, I'm just going to create stuff. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to go into my big, messy art room, and I'm going to work on stuff as it calls to me. They would get a lot more done.
I think you're magic. I really do. Like, I feel like you're just describing me to everybody here. And I'm so glad you mentioned all this, because I was going to point out in chapter 3, you talk about artistic vision versus artistic reality. And that is definitely something I know a lot of people struggle with. You have the concept of what you want to make in your head, and it never matches.
Well,
ever.
Yes, and this is where it can get really life-changing for an INFP artist, actually, because our culture is so product-focused. Like, let's get to that end result, which is a very masculine way to do things. You know, we're going to plan it out, we're going to take action, and we're going to get this outcome. We are attached to this result.
Never occurred to me that was masculine, but now that you say it, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying that like, you know, men and women. I just mean like that is actually the neutral masculine energy. Masculine is directed outwards. It takes action. It's linear. It's rational. That's great. That's great if we're working at like an advertising agency and we need to get a certain mock-up to a client by 2 p.m. today. Cool. If you are an INFP artist and you're actually trying to work with something that is coming out of your own soul, you're trying to go deep inside, you're trying to work with your old wounds, your memories, your life experience, and you're trying to pull something out of that darkness and make it into something beautiful that other people can understand. You can't work with that masculine method. You can, but it's going to be a lot harder.
It's like self-flagellation, because it never works for me. I just end up getting stuck and angry and then disappointed and frustrated, and then I move on, but I'm never fulfilled.
Exactly. So what happens is if you shift into the feminine, which is irrational, receiving, dreaming, patient, just sort of like flowing and letting things come to you and not judging them, just like, okay, it's here, I'm going to work with it. It's more of like a giving birth. Like, I don't have control. I'm just here. I'm just pushing something out. But speaking of pushing, that's the thing is INFPs, their whole entire lives, they've been pushing themselves. They have known from an early age, the way I do things is not the way other people do things. I am weird. I'm different. I need to get on board. So INFPs a lot of times they'll like sort of get behind themselves energy-wise and push. Like if they're in a group of people, they push themselves to talk. If they're like in a situation where they feel like they should be more extroverted, they'll push themselves to do it. If they have an assignment, they'll push them. They're so used to this pushing. That's what they do. But what will really work for the INFP creative person is letting themselves be pulled. So once they're in that big, messy art room with their 5 or 6 projects and they just stand in the middle of it and they're like, what am I pulled towards? They will instantly get it. And they're like, oh, the collage. I got to work on the collage today. That sounds fun. That's pulling me. And once they start going with that pull, it's so much easier because they don't have to do anything. They're just pulled. They automatically know where to go and what to work on. And they're not like beating themselves up about it. Like, I need to finish this. They're just like, yeah, I worked on this piece today. It was amazing. It felt delicious to do that. It's a much different way of feeling in the body, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I've had moments like that, but I don't know. I never really paid attention to make that the regular practice, because just like you said, I am a little scatterbrained, and so I make a lot of lists, but then I feel obligated to go through them in a certain order, and that structure does not work for me all of the time.
You know what, though? Right there, you see, like, that's the cultural programming. I'm a little scatterbrained. You're not scatterbrained. You're highly creative. You're highly intuitive. You're not scatterbrained at all. Your brain works in a highly creative, highly intuitive way. It's different than the way the most of the population works. But scatterbrained is like, oh, I kind of need to get it together. Like, I've got all these pieces flying around, and like, I need to get organized. You don't need to organize anything. Your organizational system is already orbiting in your head perfectly. You've just been fighting it.
You're making this really hard because you just keep stunning me, and I feel like I should have conversation ready, and I don't. One of the things I read in your book that I did want to mention is in one of the chapters you talked about you had a bunch of unfortunate deaths when you were really young, and in high school you sort of knew you wanted to be a writer, but you didn't actually spend a whole lot of time writing. And that little story was really powerful to me because I feel like we kind of, as a society, don't pay attention to anything that happens before high school. If you liked art as a 10-year-old, that's fine. You were 10. But if you didn't do it in high school and you don't do it after that, then you're not an artist. And so the fact that you held on to that so hard and you kept going back to that was just amazing to me, because you said you only wrote a couple of poems and yet you still held on to this, I want to be a writer, and you gave yourself the permission to do it. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I spend a lot of time in Facebook groups and in my own head because I'm a thinky person, and I see this so often. Am I too old to start? Or I don't know. I want to help people who feel that way, and I just don't know what to say. And you managed to hold on to that and go back to it, and I just find that amazing.
Well, I think this is actually part of a really big, huge, deep change that's happening in our society right now. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was probably part of the last generation before the internet. So, when I was in high school, we didn't have the internet. And things have changed so much since the internet has come in. But prior to the internet, there was this programming in our culture that says you have to be trained by experts to do something. If you want to be good at something, if you want a career in something, you need to go to college, you need to get a degree in it, you need to apprentice, you need to get a certification. Somebody who knows more than you and is superior to you needs to approve of what you're doing and the way you're doing it. That is when you get permission to do that thing. Now, I'm not saying we should throw that whole model out. Like, obviously, if you want to be a surgeon, yeah, cool. Let's still do that. Let's still have, experts teach you how to cut open a head.
I definitely want my surgeon to be certified and knowledgeable. Yeah,
exactly. There's a time and a place. But what we were doing, we were sort of slapping that on everything. So if you want to be a painter, same thing. You have to go to college. You have to get an MFA. Whatever you want to do, you have to go through this process where someone who is better than you, who is superior to you, puts a stamp of approval on you. With the internet, especially in the past 5 to 10 years, all of that has changed, especially for creative people. So you see now that people don't need to have an agent. They don't need to go through one of the big 5 publishing firms. They don't need to get an MFA to, put their art out on the internet and sell it. If you can put up a website and you can make some social media accounts, you're in business. You can do it. So that's something that is really, really changed. And like when I was in high school, it was like, well, I had to hold on to that dream, but I always was like, it's not going to happen because I have to get this agent and I have to do this or that. The thing that happened that really brought me back to that, I joined a writing program, so I was writing, but it was starting a blog. When I started a blog and I started connecting with other people, and they would reach out and say, I read this article that you wrote about writing your first draft and it really affected me. I was like, wow, okay, this works. Like, this is actually a thing. I can write something, I can hit the publish button, and other people will read it, and things are growing because of that. So that's what's really, really different now. And it's okay if you started doing something when you were 10 and now you're 50 and you're like, I haven't picked up a pencil in 40 years and it's too late. It's not too late. Like, draw something and put it on Instagram now. See what happens. you have nothing to lose. The worst thing will happen is
Absolutely.
you won't get any likes. Okay, well, try it on Twitter. Try something else. Like it can be this sort of constant process of experimentation now. And that's what I really try to shift people into and when I find I have a client who's like, well, I haven't done this since I was 10 years old. It's too late. More often than not, they still have that old programming of like, I needed to go through some sort of training course where an expert put the seal on me and I missed that window and now it's too late. And if we can clear that out, you don't need any expert to come in and say, yep, you're good enough now. You can go out there and give it to the world. That's when the creative channel starts to open. And that's where we really start getting somewhere with it, if that helps.
Oh, no, that's tremendously helpful. How do you suggest people give themselves that permission or let go of that programming?
Well, it's not going to be like a simple thing. It's not like you wake up.
Never is.
Yeah, it's not like you wake up one day and you're like, I suddenly feel confident. I'm just going to do it today. Like you're going to like start the blog and then you're going to run to the bathroom and throw up. Like people have, my clients will be like, I don't know what happened. I put my first blog post out. I thought it would feel great. I felt sick all day. It's like, of course, because you're so vulnerable. You're exposing yourself. You're really putting yourself out there. The best thing you can do to move forward is know that it's going to feel really uncomfortable. Like you're going to be drawing the drawing and the whole time like thinking in your head, this is awful. No one's going to like this. And then you're going to put the drawing on Instagram and you're going to obsessively check to see if anyone's liked it. And when you get 2 likes, you're going to be like, that's it. I'm horrible. Like all of that stuff is normal. Just because you're having those thoughts and feeling those uncomfortable feelings doesn't mean that it's a bad idea to keep pushing ahead. You got to just keep slow, step by step doing it. Even if you feel sick or you feel scared or you feel like a failure, you just got to do another small step the next day, another small step. They add up. It's not like the most glamorous thing of like, well, yeah, this is the magic elixir and now I'm confident, but it does work.
It's never glamorous.
Yeah.
It's never glamorous. That actually tails really nicely into the part of your book where you talk about trying to think and force your creativity instead of allowing the inspiration to come back. Is this something that is a problem specifically with the INFJ/P?
Well, I find this it's a problem because a lot of online writing culture is so rooted in the masculine. I don't even think they know they are. It's just part of our society. But if you go online, you'll find a lot of stuff like, yeah, if you want to be a real writer, you write every day. It doesn't matter if you feel like it. You sit your butt in that chair and you stare at that page until the words come, and they're hard words, but they're good words. It's like this very Hemingway thing, right? Like, yeah. You just sit there with like your bottle of whiskey and you just force it out. And it's like, what if I can't do that? Am I weak? Like,
who was the one person who said, I only write when I'm inspired and I am inspired every day at 9 a.m.?
That's very, very popular. Like, well, you got to get on a schedule and you got to treat it like a job, and it doesn't matter if you don't like it, and if you're not going to do that, well, I guess you're not a writer. The other thing I see that it really gets me, there's a lot of stuff in writing culture, like real writers read a lot. Real writers, if you don't have, as Stephen King says, if you don't have time to read, then you don't have time to write. Well, that's great, but that doesn't take into account there's a lot of dyslexic writers out there.
Really?
Yeah.
That never occurred to me.
I have clients who've come to me who are such talented writers, and they are so ashamed because they say, I don't read. Reading is so hard for me. I can read like 1 book a year because it's so mentally taxing for me to sit and read a book. And they say, I do audiobooks. Like I can totally do that, but they feel this sense of shame because real writers read a lot of books. That's what you do. You're very well read. So writers come in all shapes and sizes. I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I really want to get that across, that artists come in all shapes and sizes. You don't have to be a certain way to be an artist or a writer or a creative person. You are you.
Absolutely. I don't mind the tangent. And I know your book is about writers, but everything in it, if you replace writing with painting or creating or whatever, it is entirely applicable, which is why I asked you on here today.
Well, so just to get back to your question of like, well, what do you say, about waiting for the inspiration to come? Because that's really discouraged in writing culture. Well, you got to make it. You just, like you said, you sit down at 9 a.m. The thing about creativity really needs instability to thrive.
Really?
Creativity needs an unstable environment. Now, and if you think about this, you can see it. Like when you have a very rigid, structured kind of energy, there's not a lot of room to move, right? So
Right.
like if you look at like toddlers, right? Toddlers need a really rigid, structured environment. They have little freedoms, but there's not a lot of room to move, right? So if you're getting a toddler dressed, you say, do you want to wear the pink pants or the blue pants?
Right.
So it feels like there's freedom, but they've only got two choices because they're in a rigid, structured environment with a parent who is really watching over them. They can't just like go off the rails. Creativity really needs to go off the rails. And if you see like any structure that's very rigid, like government, oppressive governments, schools that are very rigid and structured, workplaces that have a lot of rules. If you have ever worked in a workplace where you're being micromanaged, right, you can see that there's not a lot of creativity because there are so many rules. It's rigid. Creativity needs space. It needs a lot of big open space to come into form, to let forms come into what they will be and then maybe collapse, maybe fall apart, or maybe keep growing, right? So this is hard for people, especially people in Western culture, because we are so attached to our structures. We are so attached to time. All of us are very, very cognizant of time. Like we always know what time it is and what the next thing is we're going to do and how the rest of our day is going to unfold. If you pick a random person in America today and you say, what are you doing this afternoon? Oh, they know what they're doing at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. and they know what time they're going to bed tonight. They know all that, right?
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah, it doesn't occur to us that like that's not normal. Like that's what you do. Creativity works best in an environment sort of like the ideal if a toddler had their way. Just the whole day is open. Who knows what's going to happen? Anything could happen. So you start that creative project and you're like, I see a unicorn and I see some purple glitter, but that's kind of all I know. You got to just go with it. And maybe you end up, instead of drawing a unicorn, you draw a businessman. And you're like, this is weird. I don't even like business. I don't know why I'm drawing this Wall Street guy. Who knows? Go with it. That can feel very scary, though, because there's this level of uncertainty. Things feel unstable. And a lot of creative people will tell you, if you really talk to them, my whole life I've been a little bit worried about the state of my mind. Sometimes I'm a little bit manic. I have these periods of depression. I get very intense about things. Things really affect me. I'm very emotional. That's all part of having that unstable temperament. And that's why people who have that unstable temperament, the INFPs and the INFJs, they do so well in the artistic realms because they have that environment that the creativity can come in and really expand and play. I know that sounds crazy. Like a lot of people are like, but I don't like that. I don't want to be unstable. You are. Too bad.
No, I mean, it does sound a little bit crazy, but I also think it just totally makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, you find with a lot of intuitive introverts, they've always inside felt unstable and been worried about it. Like, do I have a mental illness? And I'm not saying, sometimes you actually do have a mental illness, but a lot of times nothing is wrong with you. You're not going to harm yourself. You're not going to harm other people. It's just that you are going to have these periods where your pendulum swings really wide. You go from one extreme to the other. And a lot of times that comes in the artistic process. People are so euphoric while they're creating. The project comes to an end and they feel grief. They actually feel like depression comes on because they're grieving the end of that project. And to the outside world, that doesn't make sense. But we've been engaged with this project with our heart and our mind and our soul, 6 months, a year, 5 years, and now it's done. Of course, grief is natural.
I keep saying that, but I never considered it. You're just amazing.
Well, thank you. I feel like I'm always like, I'm just rambling. Like, these people are probably like, Lauren, shut up.
No, it's wonderful because these are things that I deal with in my own head. And I talk to my mom, who is also an artist, and I'm lucky. I'm self-employed. We run a custom leather jewelry business. So I have a really controlled life. I don't have to go out and work. I get to allow my introvert to happen. And yet when I go out and I talk to my friends who don't have that freedom, they talk about this stuff and I get it, but I don't always know what to say. And it's really comforting just to hear you say this. And so that I can say, you know what? Read this book. This is normal. What you're feeling is normal. That validation is huge.
The other thing, in our culture, art's not taken seriously. That's a big thing. I mean, you could say, oh, of course it is. There are galleries in New York and people study Jackson Pollock and Picasso. And like, Yes, but no. I mean, if you are like a big time CEO person and you're running this company and you're like, I am so stressed out, I'm working 90 hours a week and I have this huge deal going through, people are like, oh, of course, what you're doing is important work. Especially with technology coming in. You see so much now, young people being geared towards science and tech and, the medical field. And that's great. Like, we need all that stuff. But you don't see a lot of like art and poetry and painting and literature and dance. Young people are not pushed towards those areas because those areas are seen as hobbies.
Not only they not pushed towards them, but they definitely, I have a 19-year-old daughter. She recently graduated high school. I am shocked at how much they push college for everything. Like, yeah, college is important, but really you don't need it to be a painter. And I know you said that before, but it shocks me at how much we really believe that we can't do it because somebody didn't give us a stupidly expensive piece of paper.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, at this point, you don't need it to be a CEO. Like, I really think in the next 10, 20 years, you're not going to need college at all. There's no reason for it. Any information you need, you can find online. You can find it
Absolutely.
in video form, and like you can find it's so easy. So I think that the only reason college it's entrenched because we have that model of thinking of we have to do it this way.
Oh, you keep taking me off track. I wanted to ask you about, you talk about self-doubt. Can we talk a little bit about self-doubt? Because that's a huge problem. How do you recommend that people deal with it? And how is it entrenched in these personality types that we might be able to recognize and help ourselves through?
Well, okay, so the first thing I will say is INFJs and INFPs definitely tend to suffer from self-doubt more than the general population. Again, this comes back to because we are just so different. We are wired so differently than everyone else. And we're so intuitive that from a very young age, we are very aware of that. We're not walking around like clueless that we're different. We've known since we were in kindergarten, whatever our first big outside of the home social interaction, or even if our parents were very different temperaments, it might have been inside the home. But from being very young children, we immediately knew I am doing something different than everyone else. I don't know what it is, but it's weird. Other people think I'm weird. The observations I make, they're not really getting them, or they're making them uncomfortable. There's this difficulty in communicating with other people. I seem to know exactly what's going on with them. They have no idea what's going on with me. And this holds steady for years and years and years. And it can go a couple of different ways. The INFJ or INFP person might choose to go into full rejection. Like, well, the world's not for me and something's wrong with me and, whatever, screw them. Like, I don't need it. I'm just going to sort of like be this total introvert recluse and I'm going to reject everything. I'm going to say no to everything. And they're very guarded. They have a lot of walls up, very high anxiety. Then you have the other way they go where the INFJ or the INFP person becomes very accommodating and is like, okay, I'll just blend in like a chameleon. I'll just keep all my weird stuff on the inside. And I'm just going to secretly kind of think I'm crazy. I might share that with a couple people, but secretly I'm always going to think I'm crazy. And something's wrong with me. I'm flaky. I'm spacey. I can't get it together. Again, there's very high anxiety.
That makes, when I do that though, it just kind of builds up and then it explodes.
Yeah.
Like, I can't hide that forever.
Yeah, it always comes out. There's no, like, it's not like, oh, now this is just safely buried away. That's great. No, it always comes out. So those are the two main ways that manifests for INFJs and INFPs. And the self-doubt is really a part of that. Like, because they're so used to doubting themselves. They're so used to saying, like, I don't know, something's just wrong with me. That's what it basically is. Something's wrong with me. It doesn't matter if it's that I'm weird or I don't do things. It's just something's wrong with me. So they always are going to have that self-doubt piece. One of the keys to overcoming that is to get to know more about your temperament and to join some sort of online community, whether that be Twitter or a private Facebook group, or maybe you just find a blogger you really like, but some sort of place where you can come into contact with other intuitive introverts and you can hear their stories and you can exchange information. When you get that, like, oh my gosh, someone else does this too, like, wow, it's so liberating and it's so comforting. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that self-doubt never really goes away. And
that's really not what I wanted you to say.
well, the thing is, again, I know I'm always like, in our culture, this thing sucks. But in our culture, we live in this very, again, masculine culture where there's a problem, we identify the problem, and then we conquer it. We attack it, and we live in a warrior culture too. You know, I'm a warrior. I'm just going to get in there, and I'm never going to stop fighting, and you can't beat me, and I'll never surrender. So we bring this to our emotional stuff too. And you see that a lot of times in therapy. Someone's like, I have a problem, and I went into therapy to fix it, and I'm working on it. I'm working on my stuff, and there's this implied feeling that at the end of the process, the person will have conquered it. You know, now they will be able to be in a healthy relationship. Now they won't be anxious anymore. And therapy works wonders. Like sometimes, yeah, you're like, wow, I'm way less anxious than I was before therapy, or I'm way more well-versed in healthy relationships. Like totally cool. But the thing is, that's not really the true story of how humanity works and how people work as complicated, complex beings. We all have self-doubt. If we're expecting it to be a problem that can be conquered, we're going to be really disappointed, and we're always going to feel like, I failed. I didn't do it yet. I didn't conquer that problem. The thing is, self-doubt is not a problem. Self-doubt is like an ocean wave. Sometimes the tide is in, and sometimes it's out. Cool when it's out. The sun is out. It's out. You can go pick up some seashells. You got a lot of sand to work with. Awesome. I'm really glad the tide's out. But you know what? Sometimes the tide comes in, and it usually comes in like clockwork, according to a cycle. And when the tide's in, wow, okay, just be prepared for it. It's intense. You know, like your sandcastles are going to get carried out to sea. You might not have as much beach to work with. You might get a little scared, like the tide might take me out. It's just this very intense, out of control feeling. That is a human emotional life. The human emotional life works in cycles, and it works in waves. And sometimes you're in a cold patch, you're in a wave. It just sucks. It's uncomfortable. You feel out of control. It's really intense. You wish it wasn't that way. It doesn't mean it's a problem. It's just part of the human emotional life. Sometimes things are great, and you're like, oh, I got the surfboard on top of the wave. I'm surfing. I think I finally got this. And then you crash.
Oh my goodness, yes. Every time you stand up, it just knocks you back down. And it happens. That happened to me this year. I launched the podcast and then took 5 months off because life just kept coming.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's where a lot of our unhappiness in life comes from, because we live in this culture where we believe we should be happy. And if we're not happy, something's wrong. Happy is like tired. Sometimes you're tired and sometimes you're not. Or hungry. Sometimes you're hungry. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're excited. Sometimes you're not. So happy is like the only thing we should think it should be a constant. Everything else we're like, oh yeah, that's temporary. Tired, sad.
No, that's so true.
Like being age 40, like everything else we're okay with, like, yeah, that's a temporary thing. But happy, that should be eternal. Like we should just be happy. And if we're not, something's wrong. Something's wrong. It needs to be fixed. And that's when we start to go a little bit crazy. Because if you always felt like you should never be tired, anytime you got tired, you'd start freaking out. Like, well, I don't know why I'm tired. I need to take pills. I need to go to therapy. I need to work on this being tired feeling. No, it's just telling you something. You need to sleep. Go to sleep. You'll get up. You won't be tired anymore. It's just human life. I mean, I know I'm putting it in like really simplistic terms, but it's something I feel really passionately about, and I see a lot in our culture.
No, I completely agree. And I completely agree. When I get tired and I feel it deep down in my bones, it's really easy to just drink more coffee and just push through it until I crash. And then I don't have a choice but to rest and to sleep and to deal with it. And it is a cycle. And now that you point that out, I completely see it, but it's not something that I had been aware of. And maybe being aware of it will allow me to be less mean to myself when it is happening.
Well, and if you're an artist and you really get to know your artistic rhythm and cycles, and that's something I work on with people in coaching, is really getting to know your own unique artistic rhythm, because every artist has their own unique artistic rhythm. You'll notice when the self-doubt and the dark feelings come in. For some people, like I said, it's right after they finish a project. They have a big grieving process. Other people don't have that. Other artists are like, yeah, I just finished. I feel great. For some people, it's right when they start the work. They feel euphoric about the idea, and then they start bringing it into form, and they see that it's not going to look like what they thought in their head, and they feel very depressed about that. If you know your own artistic cycle, you can have that awareness and say, oh yeah, I always feel really down after I start a project, and I feel full of self-doubt and kind of full of despair. It'll pass. It feels really uncomfortable and unpleasant right now, but it will pass. And that goes a long way because you free up all that energy. You're not like worried about your state of being. Like, well, what's wrong? Why do I feel this way? I need to push myself out of it. You're just like, no, I just feel this way right now. It's not a big deal. It kind of sucks, but it's life.
So there's one other thing that I want to ask you about, and it would be the empathic part that you talk about in your book. So when I was growing up, I apparently am incredibly empathic. My mom could walk into the room and literally breathe, like she would, or open a cabinet door, like she was doing absolutely nothing. And I knew exactly how I'm like, what's the matter with you today? She's like, how do you even know? I haven't even said anything. And so like my husband and we definitely, I pick up his emotions or he picks up mine. And so I was really interested in the part where you're talking about empathic because I mean, I know it's part of who I am, but I don't always know not how to control it, but how to cope with it.
Okay, well, this is another one. I get this a lot from my clients because all my clients are empaths. INFPs and INFJs are all empaths. And empaths, being an empath, it's like this thing you read about where you're like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. It sounds like a superpower.
Oh, no, it's really not.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you just know what's going on with people. You have this crazy intuition. It sucks. Like, it totally sucks, especially when you're growing up and you have no idea what's happening and you just kind of get zapped by something. And it shows up for every empath differently. Some empaths get migraines. Some empaths have stomach problems. Some empaths have high anxiety or depression. So there's not much you can do there's not like a fix. Like I always tell my clients, it's like you were born as a German Shepherd. A German Shepherd is a dog that comes with a certain bundle of traits. And it's great as long as the German Shepherd is around sheep, right? If the German Shepherd's not around sheep, it's going to just start sort of hurting anything because that's what it's born to do. People who are empaths are born healers. We want to help. We have this wiring. We're so good with other people and picking up on their stuff because we are born to help people heal. So what this looks like in real life is you need something in your life that is contributing to helping something heal. It doesn't have to be people. If you are volunteering your time on the weekend to go pick up trash on some beach, you're helping the earth to heal. But if you have that service piece in your life, your empath abilities will actually stop going so haywire around everybody because you'll be focusing them and sort of like aiming them at something. Because that's what they're tied into, I believe, is this like healing piece. We all INFPs and INFJs have that healing piece, and it's usually tied into our creative work too. You don't find a lot of INFJs and INFPs who are like, well, I'm just making art just because I like the way it looks. It's all about the aesthetic design for me. It's usually because they're trying to say something. They've seen something in the world or they've had some experience that they want to convey to the rest of the population. Like, this is important. You know, I had this emotion. This is important. This is what heartbreak feels like. This is what it looks like. This is what oppression makes me feel like. This is what it looks like. There's always that deeper piece, that healing of humanity piece. So that's one element that comes into the mix. The other element is just observing yourself. And anytime you feel weird, so you get a headache, you feel nauseous, you feel anxiety, you just feel off in your body, think, what happened to me in the past hour? Who did I talk to? What was I thinking about? What did I come in contact with? And just observe and make those observations over a long period of time. A lot of the time you'll still be like, I don't know, I'm crazy. Nothing happened. I'm just crazy. I have a migraine now for no reason. It's all my fault. And you'll go into a hole. Other times you'll be like, oh, I talked to my dad. He was really upset. He lost a lot of money. Oh, and now I have a migraine. Okay. Like, that, is that mine? Is that his? Oh, that's his stuff. I just had it yesterday. I was texting with a friend, and, we were texting about something sort of emotional, not that emotional, and, I stopped texting with them, and then I felt horribly sick, and I had to lay down, and I was like, I have a headache, I feel like I'm going to throw up, and it wasn't until about a half hour later that I thought, oh, that's their stuff. It's not my stuff, because once I really realized it wasn't mine, it lifted. And it was just gone. And I was like, that's happened to me before, and it's happened to me enough times that I can say, oh, when I feel like that came from someone else. It doesn't mean I'm not going to feel it. It doesn't mean I'm not going to have the half hour of laying on the bed like, oh, I feel kind of dizzy and weird and sick, and I can't really explain this to anybody else, you know?
Right.
But at least I know. At least I'm not like, yeah, I got sick out of nowhere. Maybe I have some sort of disorder going on. It's like, no, it's just my empathic stuff coming up.
That's incredible, because I definitely have that. I had some bad news about something going on with a family member this morning, and I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this emotion because I feel bad and I want to fix it and I can't. And, I had a headache and I'm like, I have an interview. I can't feel this way. But once I was able to breathe and absolutely admit that because it was so obviously connected, it did go away. Drink some water, took an Advil, and I was able to keep functioning.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Sometimes you just can't keep functioning, and that's very hard for intuitive introverts and empaths. Like we're so used to forcing ourselves through it. Like, well, I'll just go to class anyway. I'll just go to work anyway. It's not, especially we live in this culture where it's like, well, it's not okay to take a lot of time off work. It's, you got to work a lot and you got to show up and do all these things and these appointments. It's okay to cancel things. It's okay to be like, yeah, it's really inconvenient for everyone involved, and I'm going to cancel. I do it a lot. I cancel coaching calls. I cancel interviews. I have taken a lot of sick days. When I had a day job, I would take a lot of sick days. I'd be like, how many sick days do I get? 12? Okay, I'm taking them all. I just went for it. But once I started giving myself that permission of like, I can't leave the house for the next 4 hours. I'm in no sort of shape to do that. It got a lot better. And it really, I do still sometimes beat myself up, but I just don't, if someone's like, oh, why weren't you there? I'm like, I wasn't feeling well. I don't go into it. I'm not like, hey, just so you know, I'm an empath. And sometimes I go into these crazy spirals where I get someone else's energy. Like, I'm just like, oh, I wasn't feeling well. And it's crazy how many times people are like, oh, sorry to hear that. And then they move on. It's not a big deal.
That's absolutely true. I've done that. And I feel bad when I have to say, yeah, no, I can't do that. But ultimately, I feel better because I didn't force myself to do it. I've had days where I'll have so many errands and so much stress and so many things. I'll say to Chris, dude, I am not even going to check the mailbox for 2 days. I'm not leaving the house. If you want the mail to come in, you're going to need to go get it.
That's really hard for empaths. We have a really hard time putting ourselves first. It feels
I'm
selfish.
terrible at it.
Yeah. But once you start doing it, and once you start getting the feedback where you're like, oh, I canceled that thing, and actually everybody was able to do it without me, and, everything didn't collapse. You keep seeing that over and over. You're like, they'll live. People will live. Life will go on. The world will still turn. And then...
Yeah, no, it's only you who feels guilty about it. They're okay. They deal.
Yeah.
This has been an absolutely incredible conversation. And before I let you go, I do have one incredibly selfish writing-based question.
Yeah.
So I have wanted to be a writer forever, and it's something that I have toyed with. But I grew up in an intensely, terribly stressful place to the point where I avoid conflict at all cost. And so when I sit down and I try to write, it really irritates me when people can't just talk it out. And they've said oh, well, they need diametrically opposite things. But I literally just feel like I cannot make these characters do something that causes conflict because it's not what I would do. It's like secondhand embarrassment. I get stressed out because of the things they are doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you just opened a Pandora's box. So, warning you, I'm going to go there. So that's another way I really differ from a lot of mainstream writing culture. If you talk to a lot of writing coaches and experts, that's very popular. You'll see the story grid engine, and this is the way to, draw your characters, and you make lists of what they're like and their motivations.
I'm terrible at all of that stuff.
Yeah, what's the lie they're telling themselves? And you need to know all this. I do not believe that characters are made up people that you are making do things. I think if you approach your characters as made up people who you make do things, more often than not, they come across as puppets on the page. I've read a lot of books. Where I'm like, this character is just sort of this wooden, stilted thing that's moving around. And
Yeah.
you can actually see, if you watch any of the really mainstream Dwayne Johnson action movies, like, no offense to Dwayne Johnson, but if you watch any of the really popular blockbuster movies, you can see how the characters are just stereotypes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like, man who was in the war, who is full of honor and nobility, but got kicked out because his integrity was too much. But now he's got to rescue the world, and his wife is, and you don't really care about those people. They're not very interesting. They are just archetypes. They're just stereotypes moving around on the page. That's what tends to happen when you use these, like, well, your characters have to do this, and now your character has to have a conflict here. You get these stories where there's a lot of action and there might be a great idea. And a lot of writers are really focused on the idea. Like, oh, this is a great idea. I'm going to have these puppets acted out. Well, that's great. And that sells. Don't get me wrong. It's not what I'm into. The books that really move me are character-based. When you get into character-based books, the characters act like real people. So sometimes their motivations aren't clear. Sometimes they do confusing things. Sometimes they completely contradict themselves. Sometimes they are unlikable, like they just are. And when you start working with characters like that, when you have a character show up in your head and you're like, all right, dude, I'm going to actually honor you as a real person. And I'm just going to work with you and transcribe what I see you doing or what you tell me you want me to transcribe. You're going to get into entirely different territory. So you might have characters that don't have conflict. Like, you might have characters who talk it out. That's their thing. That might be their conflict. They always talk it out with people. You don't know yet. But I think when you're sitting down, you're trying to say, like, I'm in control. I'm making these characters do things. I have been told that on page 3, they need to move around in this way. And then your characters are like, screw you. I don't want to do that. Like, that doesn't sound fun to me. Why am I working with you? You're just trying to force me to do things. I'm not in your play. This is my life. Have a little respect. I got a problem
Absolutely.
here.
Well, I mean, it's like when you watch a movie and you go, if they had literally had a 2-second conversation, this entire movie would not have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it feels like. I'm trying to force this conflict, and I get irritated and embarrassed and upset, and I don't know how to move past it. So that's interesting.
That irritation and that anger and that embarrassment. First of all, you probably, this is going to sound really crazy. Writers who are empaths are also empathic with their characters. So that irritation you're feeling is probably coming from your characters. Your characters are probably like, why are you doing this? Let me do my thing. I already know what I already know what I need to do here, or what happened in this situation. I'm trying to convey it to you, and you're trying to push me in this other direction. I don't want to go there. That's not what happened. So that's probably where the irritation is coming from. The anger and the embarrassment, that's indicating there's some disconnection between what you're mentally trying to do and what your heart feels is the right thing to do. Whenever you feel that kind of like chafing anger, like, oh, that feels so abrasive and irritating, there's some disconnect between your mind and your heart. And usually it's your brain is trying to push things in a certain direction because it makes rational sense, and your heart is like, no, I'm not on board with that. That's not right. That's not the right thing to do here.
And that absolutely sounds true no matter what it is you're working on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whenever you get that, and it will feel like an abrasive feeling. It'll feel like you're being rubbed the wrong way. Like, oh, like, I just don't like that. Oh, like this resistance and irritation, anger will come up. Usually when anger comes up, it either means that a boundary is being violated, so somebody around us is violating a boundary in some way, or if it's just an inner thing, then it's like, oh, there's a disconnection between the mind and heart.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We are just about at an hour, and I feel like I just want to be your best friend now and just hang out with you.
Oh, yay. You totally can. You can always email me, Jessica. Like, I'm always around.
I probably will. And I definitely would love, if you do another project or another book, please reach out. I would love to talk to you again, because I think this conversation is going to be incredibly helpful to a lot more people than I even realize, because all of the stuff is true no matter whether you're a writer or not. And I hope everybody who listens to this goes out and buys your book, because it is part of what helped me get back to, okay, now I can make the things again. And I recognize that I'm not crazy. And it is so comforting to have somebody recognize that and tell you you're not crazy.
I mean, the only reason I know this is because I thought I was crazy for like 25 years. I'm like the queen of telling myself I'm crazy. I still do it. I did it yesterday when I was sick and I was like, I'm just crazy. And I was like, no, I'm not crazy. I know now I'm not crazy. That's one of the biggest things we deal with.
So before we go, I have one question that I ask everybody at the end because you need a little levity. What is your favorite curse word?
Oh, it's got to be fuck. Like,
that comes up a lot, but every once in a while we get something different. Mine personally is motherfucker. Everything, all the time. It's my favorite.
Yeah, I really like fuck because I feel like and I have this thing with words where I can really feel words, and fuck is like, it's short. It's this little compact thing, but it's kind of got a spike on the end. Maybe it's the K. Like the K almost seems like a spiky thing. So it's,
well, it kind of is. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the FUC is like this handle, and then the K is just like this little spike. So when you insert it into a sentence, it's like this little like staple. It's like this little punctuation mark in the middle of the sentence. I just really like it. So
do you want to share one more time where people can find you?
Oh, well, my blog is laurensapala.com. So it's LaurenSapala.com. That's where my blog is. I have a books page. I've got all my coaching stuff there. I'm also on Twitter a lot. I'm at LoSapala, LOSAPALA. And I'm on Twitter like every day. If people reach out to me on Twitter, I'll totally talk to them. A lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, like I tweeted you. I hope it's okay. It's like, of course. People can email me too. Write City, WRITECITYSF @gmail.com. So it's writecitysf@gmail.com. That's on my website too. And people can always email me, which is another thing people tend to be kind of shy about. Like, oh, I didn't know if it was okay to email you. And I'm like, you should see my inbox. I get emails from so many random people, my clients. My clients will email me like, I had a crazy dream last night. I had to tell someone. So like, don't hold back. Just send me your stuff. I love it.
Awesome. I'm going to read your blog because I did look through it, and you have a ton of interesting writer interviews. And I'm totally in love.
Yeah, I try to blog regularly, but I don't put too much pressure on myself either. So that goes along with my empath stuff. I'm like, I can't do it this week. It's okay. But yeah,
the best advice I've heard recently is aim for B+, which is what I'm doing. I want to get it done and I want to get it out there, but I don't need to be an A+ student.
Exactly.
So, excellent. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that you do well. Like, I don't even know what to say to end it. I'm just so excited that this was such an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate you having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I will actually, so I'll have ended the podcast by now. Would you mind sending me your address? I would love to send you out a thank you card because I am all about happy mail that does not cost people bills.
Yeah, totally. I'll email it to you right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
Okay, we'll talk soon, Jessica.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Talking to Lauren last week has been so incredibly transformative to my life and how I just go through my day and talk to myself. I have really tried to stop beating myself up and trying to force myself into a mold that I now know is just not going to ever be possible for me. I am never going to be that person. I'm always going to be having to work on 5 projects at once. I'm always going to be this person that I am. And it is really time that I just accept that and move on, right? I hope that you feel that because that's definitely what I got from chatting with Lauren. And with the stress my life handed me this week, I don't know if I would have been able to handle it as gracefully if I had still been trying to force myself to fit an ideal that is just not me. So if you enjoyed our conversation, then you should definitely go check Lauren out on her blog or reach out to her on Twitter and just give her a shout out and say, oh my God, your conversation was amazing, or send her an email so that she knows that she really helped you, because I really want her to know how much she helped, because I want everybody to feel this gift of just breathe and be who you are. And I really feel like that's what she gave me. If you really enjoyed our conversation and that last part about where I asked about my writing characters question, if that didn't bother you, then definitely go buy her book because it's awesome. It does combine some of the mental parts that we talked about and thought processes, but it also targets some writing. Now, of course, you can absolutely interchange anywhere she says writing with creativity or with painting or with whatever, because the concepts are interchangeable, but you should know that her book is about writing. So I don't want you to pick it up if you're a painter and then you open it and you're like, why did Jess recommend this? This is a writing book. Well, because I think you can still get stuff out of it. So this week has been super crazy for me. I did actually get some really nice emails from you guys that I have to respond to. And somebody even left me a voicemail, which is awesome because I've never even told you guys that I have voicemail. You can hop over to artstuffpodcast.com and in the top right-hand corner, there's a button that says voicemail. If you click on it, it takes you to a page where you can leave me an audio message that I can download and add to the show, which I had full intentions of doing this week. And then I got a 5-year-old. Thankfully, school starts on Tuesday, and I will have actual working hours with which to attack the podcast and the rest of my responsibilities. If you enjoyed the show, please send me a DM or on Instagram or Twitter. I am at artstuffpodcast. You can subscribe wherever you find your podcasts, and I hope you guys had an incredible week. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you again next week. I have a really good conversation coming up with I'm going to call her a fiber artist, Heather Jones. She does amazing work that she sells in galleries, and she is going on a grand artist residency adventure to Africa, and I can't wait to chat with her about her process, how she found fiber art, everything else that's going on. So I will talk to you again next Monday. Have a great week.